Hello, I'm Doug Musio. This is another City Talk conversation on issues in the 2008 presidential election. In April 2007, in the press release announcing a City Talk 5-part series on immigration with my guest today, I said, and I quote, "Immigration is the paramount domestic issue facing the United States today and will play a defining role in the 2008 elections." Wrong. Immigration has become the silent issue in the campaign. Nobody's talking about it. To talk loudly on immigration is Allan Wernick, professor of law at Baruch College and chair of CUNY's Citizen and Immigration Project. His column, Immigration Advice, appears in the Daily News twice a week and is syndicated. Allan is also the author of U.S. Immigration and Citizenship, Your Complete Guide, in its 4th edition, and he is a frequent commentator on immigration issues and an occasional guest here on City Talk. Welcome back, Allan.
Thanks, Doug. It's always a pleasure.
Okay. Why no word? Why this silence? Is this the third rail of American politics?
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons why there's such a silence. One is that the two candidates don't have much disagreement over the issues. McCain originally was one of the main proponents of a broad immigration bill with a genuine path to citizenship, something Obama has supported and continues to support. He now says that he would still support that, but the American people don't trust Congress to do the right thing, so he's supporting an enforcement-first policy. But essentially, they both say that ultimately we need some path to citizenship for the undocumented. The other reason, I think, is that it's so controversial and people don't, the two candidates and the two parties really don't know how it's going to play out. There's a sense that within the Republican Party, there's a very strong restrictionist grouping within the base of the party. Not so much in the Democratic Party, but there are some people within the Democratic Party that would prefer a more restrictive policy. So I think that both candidates just would like to stay as far away from it as possible.
Talk about what would encompass a comprehensive reform. We constantly hear, piecemeal, incremental versus comprehensive. What would be included in a comprehensive reform of U.S. immigration policy?
Well, I think the notion of comprehensive reform is to include both a stronger and more efficient effort to keep out undocumented immigrants, to remove from the United States those who are here unlawfully, and at the same time, for those who are here unlawfully at the time of passage of the bill, I mean the ones who are here already, that they should get some kind of path to what they call path to citizenship, but it's really a long path in most of the proposals. So, first they would get some form of legal status, then they would become permanent residents, what people call green card holders, and then eventually they could become a U.S. citizen.
Would the goal also be expanded legal immigration?
There's some debate about that. It might. There's certainly within what they call the guest worker program or temporary worker program, there's an idea that we will increase the numbers of individuals who can come to the United States for relatively short periods of time, particularly to work in agriculture, but perhaps in some other businesses. I think the thesis there is that, and I think there's some truth to it, is that many immigrants really don't want to leave their homes. What they want is economic opportunity. So if you gave them the chance to come here and work, then the idea would be they would leave after that work was done and then come back again should the need arise for their labor. So that would be part of it as well. And then there'd be some tinkering here and there with the various quotas that exist. But again, the two main components is a path to legal status for those who are here illegally now, and some increased efforts to keep more people from coming illegally in the future.
So we're not, you're saying that we're not going to have any comprehensive reform either with Obama or McCain, likely, but we may get some piecemeal changes. What might these piecemeal changes be, and who would, would it be McCain or Obama or both who would propose these?
Well, let's start by let me start by agreeing with you that I don't think there is going to be any comprehensive change, because I don't think the situation in the country is ripe for it, especially during an economic crisis. With the idea of legalizing, the government estimates now 11.8 million undocumented immigrants in a time with rising unemployment. It seems unlikely.
Okay, so you're saying that the current financial crisis and the downturn in the economy really puts a severe constraint on efforts to add comprehensive reform.
I think it does, because I think the main impetus, the main economic and political impetus behind change, separate and apart from the grassroots advocacy on both sides, but sort of among the more powerful members of society, the idea was that we're going to have a labor shortage, and the Department of Labor has been talking about that for a long time. Now, I don't know what they're going to say now after this crisis, but up until very recently, it was predicted that we'd have a critical labor shortage, both at the high end with highly educated individuals and also with lesser skilled workers. But I don't think we're going to see any serious consideration of immigration reform. There may be bills introduced, but I don't see them going very far. I think we may see some what some might call piecemeal efforts. In prior Congresses, something called the DREAM Act, which would
talk to that.
I'll talk about the DREAM Act. Of course, it's especially important for us in CUNY, because so many of our students would benefit from it, and also, of course, students, potential students who are not in CUNY now. What the DREAM Act would do is would give permanent residence to individuals who came to the United States, depending on the version, before the age of 15 or 16, who had been here for 5 years. And the idea being that they were innocents brought here by their family members. They shouldn't be held responsible for their undocumented status. And they would be given a temporary legal status. And then if they completed 2 years of college or 2 years in the military, they would qualify for permanent resident or green card status. And then from there, they would qualify for U.S. citizenship. So that bill has passed the Senate. It has never passed the House. But I will point out that certainly Senator McCain has spoken out in favor of it and supports it. And I would mention a couple points.
And Senator Obama as well.
Too. And I would say two special things about Senator Obama, especially since he seems to be leading in the polls. And that is that during the debates with Hillary Clinton and the other Democratic candidates, when he talked about comprehensive reform, he talked about how it was going to take some efforts. He thought it was important in the long run, but he mentioned words to the effect of, well, at least we could pass the DREAM Act and do something for young people, because that's a very much more sympathetic cohort than the undocumented community in general.
Okay.
And also point out that Senator Obama is from Illinois. And the main proponent in the Senate of the DREAM Act is Senator Durbin, also from Illinois, who's very close to Senator Obama. So it seems like as a favor to him, and as something, especially if the immigrant community, which it seems to be, is moving more towards Obama as a payoff to them, he will support that. Then you also have the agricultural, the ag jobs bill. It's estimated by some that 70 to 80% of our agricultural work is done by undocumented labor. So that bill also has passed the Senate, a bill that would give legal status to a large number of agricultural workers. And again, it has not passed the House. So what the thesis I would put forward is that, you give something to big business, which would be, the agricultural jobs bill, give something to the more grassroots immigrant communities like the DREAM Act, which is, again, a very sympathetic cohort. Maybe throw in a few other small reforms, and you have a bill that I think could pass both houses and would be signed by the president. So I'm very optimistic.
And with the current Congress or the expected more Democratic-leaning both Senate and House, certainly the House?
Well, I think either, really, but certainly we do anticipate a more Democratic-leaning House. It doesn't, historically, immigration is not broken down on
party lines. That's what I was going to ask.
But I think the conditions now, especially since the AFL-CIO in the last few years has come out with a much more public pro-immigrant stand, which, at one time they had a very restrictionist stand, and I think they held back some of the leaders in the Democratic Party from going full out on immigration. So I think the conditions are right for that. I know that you know, in CUNY, the chancellor has written a letter to Congress in support of the DREAM Act, and I anticipate he'll continue with that. And you know, there'll be lots of opportunities, you know, after the election, I think, to move forward with with a campaign for the DREAM Act.
Is a highly skilled worker green card in the cards? People like Bill Gates during the summer testified before Congress on the need to increase the number of highly skilled workers into the United States. You talked about agricultural workers, sort of that end of the job market, but a concern of business, for example, in terms of competitiveness of these highly skilled workers. Is there a possibility of that?
Well, there's always
and what does that mean?
Well, just to clarify what the problem is, you know, Congress has limited the number of individuals who qualify for temporary work status based on having a 4-year college degree. And in the last few years, there's been an overwhelming response by employers to filing petitions for these workers, so much so that there's a lottery. And so basically, when this country decides which highly skilled workers it wants to bring in based on a lottery, not based on any social criteria, which is pretty ridiculous for an advanced industrialized country, it seems to me, but that's how we do it. There have been pushes, including those by Bill Gates and many other leaders of industry, for an expansion of this program. But again, I think that it depends on the economy. If the economy remains in a downturn with high unemployment, it's going to be very, very difficult. I'd point out that, you know, I mentioned the AFL-CIO. They're very, very much against any expansion of this program as they try to organize white-collar workers more. And I just don't know whether Congress is going to stomach something that appears to be making it easier for foreigners to get jobs in the United States. I mean, it's a shame that is the attitude. That's my prediction, but I would like to be wrong. You know, there's no question that all the studies and research has shown that there's no significant impact on the wages and working conditions of white-collar workers, or you know, professional workers, because of these jobs. Of course, you hear examples here and there. You know, one company is ripping off its American workers and by using foreign workers, but you know, in a general sense, in terms of the total employment in the country of these workers, there's no negative impact. And I think Bill Gates is right. There does seem to be a need. Wouldn't
there be a positive impact on these workers? I mean, if they are productive in a technologically oriented, new economy type jobs, wouldn't that benefit the total economy of the United States, irrespective of local dislocations?
Well, from your lips to God's ear. I mean, that's a great analysis, and that's the analysis that I have, and that many people in the industry have. The problem is that that's fine to say, to talk about in a global economic sense, but then when you talk to the worker on Wall Street who just got laid off from his or her high-tech position because of this downturn, and you say, well, we're going to bring in a foreign worker to compete with you for that position, it doesn't fly. So we'll have to see.
And is that in fact what would be the case?
No. Well, let me just say, in a national sense, in terms of total numbers, the numbers of H-1B workers or temporary professional workers are so small that they can't possibly have an impact. But in a particular brokerage house where they're hiring 10 workers, if they decide that they're going to find the 10 best workers, by the way, they have to pay these professional workers the prevailing wage. So the employer's not getting anything special, but they're going to pick the best people. And if those 10 best people come from India and China, which they very well might, given the numbers of high-tech graduates are coming from those countries, then the American worker might be out of a job, not because of his or her not being willing to accept low wages, but because they may not be able to compete intellectually. So it just depends how people see it. If people can make the argument you're making successfully, we might see it. I would not, if I had to bet, I would not bet on that. What I would say is this: DREAM Act, Ag Jobs Bill, and there's one other piece of legislation that just might squeak through, and that's an extension of a very technical provision in the law called Section 245I. And what that law does, it lets people who came here illegally or are here illegally get permanent residence if they otherwise qualify, like they're marrying a U.S. citizen or having a brother or sister, having an employer to sponsor. So let's say somebody's now working as an auto mechanic, and the employer says, I can't find a good auto mechanic to fix Volvos. It's tough to find in the United States. I hear you came here, you know how to do that. I'm going to hire you to do it. And so the employer wants to sponsor. Well, if that worker's here illegally, they're basically never going to get permanent residence. I can go into the details why that is, but I'll just summarize it. And that is, they have to leave the United States for their interview, and if they leave the United States, they can't. Well, and then they can't come back for 10 years.
Wow.
So this employer would have to wait 10 years. If this 245I expired in April 30th, 2001, that was the last was actually under Clinton, the end of the Clinton administration, there was an extension. If that provision was extended to sometime, even to the present day, you would have hundreds, thousands, perhaps millions of individuals who are in the United States, married to citizens, brothers and sisters of citizens, children of citizens, working in jobs where there's a shortage of U.S. workers, like everything from engineers to nannies and auto mechanics I mentioned. They'd all be able to get permanent residence. So these are people who already qualify, who our system says we want to get green cards, but because of this technicality, they can't. So that might be added on. I would say other than that, I would say the second administration, if there's an Obama or McCain administration and that president gets reelected, I think in the first year or two of that second term, it might be possible. That would be my prediction. Now, that's a very, negative. If you talk to some people, particularly people in Washington, who always seem to be optimistic, and I suspect sometimes they have personal reasons, professional reasons for being so optimistic, but they always seem to be optimistic that we have a chance of getting comprehensive reform, and this is what we should fight for. And I think one of the debates we're going to see in the pro-immigrant movement is whether we should support something like the DREAM Act and the Ag Jobs Bill with maybe this 245I thrown in, or whether we should hold out and say, only comprehensive reform.
But wait a minute. But I mean, that violates the rule of the perfect vetoing the good. I mean, clearly, if you can't get the perfect, which is this comprehensive, you got to settle for the good, or is it a take all or leave it all attitude? Which I think would be politically disastrous, but
well, I think that Congress, if they pass this partial solution, you can for sure, that takes comprehensive reform off the table for a good 6 or 7 years. And so people don't want to do that. On the other hand, if you're convinced, as I am, that comprehensive reform is just impossible, not going to happen, stand on your head and blow bubbles, have all the demonstrations you want, it's just not going to happen. If you believe that, which I do, then it makes sense to do something for, at least the ones that you can help, like these students. And of course, in CUNY, it's particularly poignant too. I mean, I just got a call the other day from somebody, one of the student service people. This woman, this student, just graduated, outstanding honor student, accepted into a doctoral program in a very prestigious institution. But the particular doctoral program requires that she work as like an internship in order to get her doctoral degree. And she can't because she's undocumented. She came as a visitor's visa. She has no relatives here who are legal, and so she's out of luck. So that old saying about mind's a terrible thing to waste. I mean, we have some of the most brilliant students, not just in CUNY but in universities all throughout this country. All the top universities will have. Most prestigious institutions have undocumented students in them, and they're just they're graduating and they end up selling flowers or working in kitchens.
Yeah, an extremely nasty abuse of and loss of intellectual capital and human capital.
Terrible. Terrible waste.
Now, we've got about 11.5 or so illegal aliens, and it seems that there was a Pew study that seemed to suggest that those numbers are declining, and now the undocumented inflow is less than the legal inflow, for example. But you still got 11.5. So when we wrote this press release a year and a half ago, it was the illegal immigrant problem. It's still there. What problems do these 11.5 million people both confront and produce?
Well, let's start with the produce, because the reason I start there is because I think that the reason, another reason why the immigration question is not at the center of the debate is that the negative impact that's alleged by those who support a very restrictionist approach has never been proven to be factually true. So, you have an incident where an undocumented person commits a heinous crime. Well, that's a terrible thing. But there's no evidence that, having large numbers of immigrants in a particular community increases the crime rate in that community. So, there's a few people who sort of get all excited about this issue, but by and large, the impact on the negative impact is negligible in terms of wages and working conditions, in terms of abuse of public benefits, in terms of crime, so in terms of disease. So all the things that the restrictionists point to, they don't affect most people, so most people aren't into this issue. And it's been shown time and time again that when politicians try and run on the immigration restrictionist platform, it doesn't help them. There's no example of any person running on a restrictionist platform successfully who wouldn't otherwise have been favored to win the particular seat. As for the individuals who are here, of course, it's a tough life. I mean, it's not as tough a life as it is in a country like Mexico or Ecuador, but it's still a very tough life here. People, especially in the situation of employment exploitation, because people who are undocumented are naturally targets. Although what happens like in agribusiness is that people get phony documents and they work and they manage. So, one thing I would say about the undocumented population, it's pretty dynamic, pretty clever and entrepreneurial, and I think it's self-selectingly so. We've talked about this before, how, you have a group of people in Mexico, and out of 5 men, 1 decides to come to the United States. Well, why did he do it? Well, because he's aggressive, he's an entrepreneur, he's an adventurer, he's physically strong, capable of making the trip. So these are the kinds of people who are coming here. They tend to be smarter, stronger, healthier, and more adventurous than the total population of their countries or our country. So they make a great contribution. So the maltreatment and the suffering of the undocumented is a lot, but it's not, sometimes it's exaggerated. I think they do okay here, a lot of undocumented people.
Okay. In terms of the Bush administration policy, over the last several months, you've seen a number of raids of factories and farms exposing extraordinary workplace abuses, but at the same time, terrorizing the immigrant community, both legal and illegal. Talk about the current administration policy towards immigrants, particularly illegals.
Well, there has definitely been an increase in enforcement in the last couple of years. I mean, these factories that have been raided, it was not a secret that there was undocumented labor there. And it's just that recently the Immigration Service has started these factory raids. None in New York, by the way, and I think it's partly because they prefer these rural areas, where it's a little easier to surround the factory and there's less likely to be, conflagration in the neighborhood as a result. So, there has been that, and also there's been increased arrests of individuals who they call abscondees, people who have already been through the deportation process found to be illegally here. And, why are they doing that? It's just speculation on my part, but, I think the sense is they want to seem to be doing something. I mean, originally when they first started doing it, people thought, well, the Bush administration was trying to push Congress by doing these raids and causing certain turmoil in these cities and states, push them towards comprehensive reform. But I don't think that
including workplace restrictions too. I mean, looking at employers as a significant part of the problem rather than the workers as the problem.
Well, that's right, and I think. Well, of course, it's, the workers get affected too, so it's,
sure.
It's the workers are, the terrible things that have happened in terms of mass detentions and deportations and, they're charging these people with identity theft. People, I just have to mention something about that. People talk about identity theft. Usually those of us who are middle class, we think of somebody using your credit card or your Social Security number, to buy a yacht or something or to mess up your credit. That's not what people did. They used non-valid Social Security cards to go to work. That's all they did. They didn't steal anybody's identity in the sense that they were using it for some nefarious purpose. In fact, if somebody uses your Social Security number to work, you get benefits paid into Social Security in your.
Wait a minute. Take my credit card,
that's
please.
Right. Take my Social Security card. Go to work, and I'll retire. So I think what's going on is that, and it's pretty cynical what the administration is doing, and that is I think they're just trying to pander to a very, to an important sector within their political base, but certainly not a majority. On the other hand, there's not a tremendous, outpouring of support for undocumented labor either. I mean, within certain communities, Of course, the members of that community are very concerned, but as a nation as a whole, you know, that these are somewhat expendable folk.
Okay, on a more specific level, in spring 2007, we talked about the proposed new citizenship exam and the increased filing fees. What has been the impact? There was real concern that you'd have more failures, the fees would keep people out. Has that happened?
Well, the fees have definitely, you know, the applications have gone down. Right. Now, what the Immigration Service would say is that, and there's no social scientific evidence either way, but they would say, well, you had so many people apply before the fees went up that's why they're not applying now. Okay. I don't really buy that. When we go out with the CUNY Citizenship Project, we're always overwhelmed by applicants. We have been before the fees went up, and we are today. I think the fees, there are certain numbers of people are not applying because of the fees. Fees are just too high, and people can't afford them. It's now $675 is the application fee, and if a couple people, a husband and wife, file together, that's quite a chunk of change. So, in terms of the test, we don't know yet. The test first went into play October 1st actually this month, and for those people who filed before October 1st, 2008, if they're interviewed before October 1st, 2009, they can take either of the two tests. Mm-hmm. So we're really not going to know the impact until October 1st, 2009, when the new test becomes mandatory, and then we'll have a sense of it.
Bottom line, your sense of what the terrain looks like in a year. You got 30 seconds.
Yeah, I think the terrain is going to be better overall. I think the enforcement is going to be, there's going to be some pulling back on enforcement, regardless who the president is. I think we're going to see some movement and some legislation like the DREAM Act and the Ag Jobs Bill. I think we're going to see some more fairness in citizenship adjudications and in an immigration
irrespective of who's president.
Irrespective, because just remember, the Immigration Service is the executive branch, and I think that both Obama and McCain have long histories, really, of being quite sympathetic to the immigrant community, and I think because the restrictions are loud but small, I think that somebody like McCain or Obama is going to be able to overcome that loud but small voice.
We'll see. You're coming back, and we'll see.
And if I'm wrong, we'll talk about it.
Yeah, and we'll show the tape.
That's right.
Take it. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Hello, I'm Doug Musio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.tv. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.